I'm just going to say this right off the bat so that there's no confusion. This is not a top 10 best list of 2020. Because of everything going on, I didn't see many movies in 2020, so I wanted to rank the ones I've seen so far. I'm sure the number of films I've seen will be increased when Oscar buzz goes around, and maybe I'll talk about those movies when the time comes. Not only did the coronavirus delay most of the major releases this year, but I was also pretty occupied by a lot of other things in my own personal life. I wasn't focused on seeing every movie that came out this year because I don't consider myself a film reviewer, quote unquote, for lack of a better term. I don't enjoy seeking out bad movies just to make fun of them on a video. I'm not into that anymore. Like, I don't want to see the Mulan remake just so I can make fun of it. I don't want to see Scoob just so I can make fun of it. So I ended up seeing only 12 movies, which is hardly anything, especially considering that I saw 32 last year. This is an open invitation for you to recommend more 2020 movies for me to watch in the comments that I don't cover in this video, because quite honestly, I've been out of the loop. So join me as I rank the very small amount of films I saw in 2020. But first, I want to give a shout out to a few 2020 TV shows. Afterlife Season 2 is the second season in Ricky Gervais's Afterlife Netflix series. It's a brilliant, sad story about a man contemplating suicide, so he kind of just says whatever the hell he wants because he doesn't care about life anymore. It's an in-depth look at psychology and grief and depression while also having that signature Ricky Gervais cynical, awkward humor. I related to it a lot, and I think it's great for anyone who goes through depression or knows someone who went through or goes through depression or grief to check out. It's so insightful, and it feels like a psychologist wrote it. It is such a good show. The Mandalorian Season 2, I gotta talk about that. Everyone watching this video probably knows that I love Star Wars, so this is an elephant in the room. I made videos this year talking about the history of Star Wars, and I expressed concerns about certain things that were being rumored for Season 2 that I wasn't happy about. All those rumors came true, and I ended up actually enjoying it way more than I thought possible. Instead of just throwing in characters we know for the sake of it, each appearance had a good reason for being there, adding something significant to Din and Grogu's story and the overall themes of the show. This is still their story. No character like Ahsoka or Boba Fett ever overshadows that. It's not the most complex, complicated, deep Star Wars thing ever made, but there is a lot of great psychological moments in certain episodes. There's a whole speech from Bill Burr about viewpoints being different based on where and what you were born into, and I loved that. It made perfect sense for the world of Star Wars. It's a show that acknowledges both the prequels and originals really well while still being its own thing. I liked Season 2 more than Season 1 as well. I feel like there was a lot of urgency, and my favorite episode was definitely the Ahsoka one. That one was really, really good. The Haunting of Bly Manor is f***ing fantastic. Hill House is one of my favorite shows of all time, so I was interested in what the follow-up would be, and they really delivered. Whereas Hill House was about trauma and family strain, this is about romance and the different forms that can take. Toxic relationships, forbidden love, affairs, jealousy, everything in a relationship that you could think of is covered in this series in a horror way. The horror is so original and different, and I've never seen anything like it. Victoria Pedretti is one of my favorite new actresses working today. She is absolutely incredible in this show and in Hill House. The show blew my mind consistently, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for some good psychological horror. Alright, let's get to the movies, and I'm starting off to the movies that I didn't really like all that much. Tenet, Christopher Nolan's latest film, and the only film of his that I've ever disliked. Concept is really cool, a lot of the action is really cool, but all of that is nothing when you don't have characters you can be invested in or a story you're interested in. It's hard to understand what's going on for pretty much the whole movie, and I wasn't interested in the story at all, so I ultimately didn't care about any of it. Usually, if I am confused by a movie like The Lighthouse, I look up explanations online because I'm curious about that kind of stuff, but with Tenet, I didn't feel any need to do that because I didn't care. The characters are pretty much just there to give exposition, and there's nothing else to it. Robert Pattinson is an incredible, incredible actor, but they don't take advantage of his acting chops in this movie. And he's only there to just spit out exposition like everyone else in the movie. There's no reason to really cast Robert Pattinson in this role because he doesn't have, any character. Movies like Inception or Interstellar worked because I was invested in the characters and the psychological themes they were going through. Leonardo DiCaprio was trying to get back to his family and move forward from losing his wife. Matthew McConaughey was leaving his family behind to save the world on a mission that could easily fail. Christopher Nolan usually takes a concept and adds depth to the characters so that it has an actual story. Inception without Leo's arc wouldn't be that great. That to me is what Tenet ended up being, and as a result, I was completely bored by the movie. Even Kenneth Branagh was just a cartoony villain who wanted to blow up the world. He didn't really have a character beyond that. It felt like someone who was a fan of Christopher Nolan wanted to make a Nolan-type film, but it didn't have any of what makes a Nolan film great, and it's disappointing because he's one of my favorite directors. Wonder Woman 1984 was kind of a mess, unfortunately. I thought the first movie from 2017 was fine, it was fun, I think it really understood the character well, and I don't really have that much of an emotional connection to Wonder Woman, so I wasn't a huge fan of it, but it definitely had a lot of good stuff going for it. It just, for me, the ending was kind of a mess. This new Wonder Woman film is much worse than the first one, though, in every way. I've never been into, godlike superheroes who are invincible and invulnerable, but my problems with this spread far past just that. The movie brings Steve Trevor back after his death in the first film, played by Chris Pine, and the explanation for his return is really weird and unnecessarily convoluted. In fact, both Diana and Steve kind of go through very similar arcs in this movie that they did in the last movie, so in many ways it feels like the movie ends up in the exact same place it started with no progression of anything. The pacing is pretty bad, and there's a ton of plot points that make no sense. Kristen Wiig's development as one of the two villains is very rushed. She could have been okay, but it ended up being just so rushed. The best part of this movie, for me, was Pedro Pascal. You're going to be hearing that a lot. Pedro Pascal in this movie is a lot of fun. He's over the top and goofy, but I felt like he very much fit into the mold of a Sam Raimi Spider-Man villain. I found myself actually being invested where his character would go, despite him not really being an original villain. He's kind of generic, but still, he's a lot of fun. The performances are all good, Diana and Steve are still likable, but the movie kind of feels pointless. Like nothing was achieved or changed. Patty Jenkins still really understands the character though, and I'm excited to see what she does with Star Wars Rogue Squadron, the next Star Wars theatrical film that she's directing. I'd also give this a 2 out of 5, unfortunately. Sonic the Hedgehog was okay, I guess. I grew up with Sonic Adventure 2 and played that game so much over the years, but aside from that and some other Sonic games from around that time like Sonic Heroes, I didn't grow up being a big Sonic guy. After the hilarious first trailer came out with a terrible Sonic design, I was ready for this movie to be atrocious and a new hilarious meme of a film, and I was kind of excited for it. However, they listened to fans and changed the design back to actually looking like Sonic the Hedgehog, and released a movie that was pretty much Alvin and the Chipmunks with a Sonic skin on it. I would have much preferred a movie where Sonic was in his own world, but instead we get one where he's in a real world trying to adjust, and we've seen this plot done again and again and again. The thing that made me somewhat enjoy the movie though was the fact that Sonic was so accurate to how he is in the games. His character is really well realized. Say what you want about this movie, but it definitely understands the Sonic character. The other thing I really enjoyed was Jim Carrey essentially just playing himself. Eggman is my favorite character in the Sonic games, so I really enjoyed Jim Carrey's portrayal. I don't think it's a movie I'd watch again, but it's a step in the right direction for video game movies. I enjoyed it just fine. I'd give it a 3 out of 5. Enola Holmes was another movie that was just fine. Millie Bobby Brown is obviously the best part, and she's a really great young actress. I've always been fascinated by the character of Sherlock Holmes, but I'm not an aficionado on the character. Henry Cavill didn't really seem like the Sherlock Holmes I know, because I'm used to Benedict Cumberbatch and Basil from The Great Mouse Detective, which is Disney's criminally underrated version of that character. So the Sherlock Holmes that I know is kind of an asshole, and mostly does cases because he gets a high off it. Sam Claflin as Mycroft in this movie felt much more like Sherlock to me than Cavill did, which is a little weird. It was a fun, disposable movie to me, and unfortunately nothing really more than that. I'd give that a 3 out of 5. Host is kind of like COVID-19's answer to the Blair Witch Project, but not as good. Characters go on a Zoom call and get haunted, and that's pretty much the entire movie. There's not much beyond that. The characters are kind of dumb, so it's difficult to resonate with them a lot of the time, but the acting is really impressive. The real reason this movie is enjoyable at all is because it was made during the pandemic, which makes it really impressive. If this wasn't made during the pandemic, I probably wouldn't have been nearly as interested in it. I'd give that a 3 out of 5 given the circumstances, having this being made over the pandemic, over Zoom. It's pretty impressive. Birds of Prey was fun. The action was well done, and not a CGI crap fest like a lot of the other DC movies. Margot Robbie is great, and there's a lot of good humor. I'd put it in the same category as something like John Wick. Super over the top, I don't take it seriously, but it's an enjoyable, one-time watch roller coaster. I prefer stuff like Joker, and I'm super excited for the Batman movie. Onward was an original Pixar film exploring fantasy tropes. The theme, though, is more so about someone who fears everything and is super awkward, finding his own confidence and sense of self. I really related to that. It's a great story about brothers and what it's like to have an absent parent in your life. The movie can be predictable and generic at times, so it's not like a top-tier Pixar movie for me, but it's another really good entry to their library. It's not one of my favorites, but it's a really good movie. Pixar is my favorite studio ever, so I'm always ecstatic to see whatever they put out. They are just the greatest. Da 5 Bloods is a movie that is absolutely insane. For the first hour, I honestly really wanted the movie to start to get going. I was a little bit worried because it was really slow. It felt like not enough was happening. But if you give the movie long enough, it is so worth it. Just keep watching it, and eventually it gets completely insane, and you're in for a really impactful ride. It's such a great tribute to war veterans and the struggles that African Americans face with systemic racism. I don't even want to say too much if you haven't seen it, because it's best to go in not knowing much. The flashbacks are also done in a really cool, unconventional way. Rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman. Delusions! The Devil All the Time has an all-star cast the size of an Avengers movie, and it even has 2 Avengers actors, Tom Holland and Sebastian Stan. Surprisingly though, it's not mainstream at all. This is an extremely dark, depressing movie about religious fanaticism and how fundamentalist religious people can harm others and themselves. Tom Holland is the protagonist, and it's easily his best role so far. A lot of people want Tom Holland to be cast in every mainstream blockbuster ever made, but I think he does even better in movies like this. The best actor in the movie, though, in my opinion, is Robert Pattinson. This guy is a master. This is no longer a surprise at this point. He's well on his way to become one of the best actors of all time. In this movie, Robert Pattinson plays a rapist preacher, which is not a sentence I ever thought I would say. I never expected to see him do that role, but he chooses roles specifically to confuse and surprise us with something completely different every time, I feel like. He's really good at choosing which movies he wants to do now and just surprising us every time. Religion is a touchy subject, so I really respect this movie for showing more negative sides of it. It feels like a lot of different short films in one movie that eventually tie in with one another in a huge climax. I honestly thought the movie was really underrated, and I don't know why it doesn't get more recognition. I would give it a 4.5 out of 5, it's that good. The Invisible Man. When I heard that title and saw the previews, I rolled my eyes. It sounded like a really dumb, cliche horror movie. However, it was actually a really good portrayal of abuse, with a lot of cool twists and psychological explorations of a human brain. The scary part of the movie is that it's a really accurate portrayal of what abusive relationships can do to someone. For me, the stuff that's scary in horror is the psychological themes and the real-life parallels, and this film is chock full of that. I think nowadays audiences' perception of what is scary has changed, and people are more into jump scares rather than actual psychology of what's being portrayed. The Invisible Man is a perfect example of a psychological horror film. This is all about the human psyche, and that's what makes it scary. Soul. Pixar is my favorite studio of all time, like I said earlier in the video, so when I heard they were doing a movie about a jazz musician directed by Pete Docter, I was hooked. The cool thing about this movie, though, is that there's a whole other element to it, exploring the dimension between life and death, where human souls can be built and sent to Earth. The character Joe is pretty much going through a massive midlife crisis in this movie, and this is his journey through that. I love jazz music, and this is a movie that's not only got a ton of jazz, it's also about dreams and life paths and the negative effects that go along with trying to accomplish those dreams. Does that sound familiar to you? It should, because it genuinely feels like a movie Damien Chazelle could have wrote, but in an animated style, and it's so complex that I don't even think kids would enjoy it. Pixar movies have always been heavily aimed at adults, but I feel like this could be their most adult film yet in terms of plot and themes. I doubt kids will even understand what's going on, and I don't think it's a bad thing at all. I think that's great. We should be getting more original films like this in animation. It has an amazing message about the fact that your life doesn't need to be confined to one purpose. There's many things to enjoy and appreciate every day, rather than just obsessing constantly over one thing to make you happy. The ending is also super ambiguous, and I feel like that could disappoint people, but I thought it was really effective. And I just can't imagine how kids will react to this. I don't know how I would have perceived it when I was a kid. I want to watch it again because right now it's not a top tier Pixar for me. I didn't have the same reaction that I did to Toy Story 4 or Inside Out, and I don't know why that is. I think it's a great movie, but I wasn't over the moon about it for some reason. If I watch it again, I might enjoy it more. For me, I'm Thinking of Ending Things was easily the best film that I personally saw in 2020. This is an incredibly philosophical, existential film about depression and suicide and what goes through someone's mind while they're going through that. It explores unfulfilled dreams and a life in which you're wondering why you've never accomplished anything. Toni Collette is probably my favorite actress of all time, and she puts on an absolutely insane performance that also manages to be extremely funny at the same time. The same applies to David Thewlis. He's fantastic. This movie found a way to explore so many of my own insecurities and fears, and I was emotionally wrecked for days after watching it, which is why I've never watched it a second time. I guarantee you it is impossible to predict what's going to happen in this film. Literally impossible. It has so many unpredictable twists and turns. Charlie Kaufman is able to have awkward, cringe-inducing humor, and it manages to also be the funniest movie I saw in 2020, while also being super depressing. There's debates between people about whether this counts as a horror film, and I'd honestly say it does count. It plays with horror tropes at times, and it is extremely meta, but it does all of that in an extremely odd, unconventional way. You can tell this movie came from someone who loves movies because there's tons of references to other films, books, and plays. This is a nerd film. I was personally horrified by this movie and extremely unsettled, so I would say it counts as a horror film. It's definitely an acquired taste because it's very, very artsy, but I still think more people need to seek it out. It absolutely floored me. Thanks everyone for watching. If you want to see the movie I made in 2020, there's a link in the description for that. Feel free to comment movies you recommend or comment about just anything. Ask me questions, do whatever. Bye-bye everyone.